This is Dustin Pickering at the New York Parrot Literary Corner. We have Pat Connors with you today from Canada. He's got some wonderful poetry to read, and if you enjoy us, subscribe to the channel. Pat Connors' first chapbook, Scarborough Songs, was published by Lyrical Miracle Press in 2013 and charted on the Toronto Poetry Map. Part-Time Contemplative, his second chapbook with Lyrical Miracle, was released in 2016. He was nominated for the 2011 Best of the Net contest, as well as the 2012 and 2013 for May International Poetry Competitions in Ireland. His poetry articles and book reviews have been published in Canada as well as Belgium and read worldwide. He was a literary juror for Big Art Book 2013 by Scarborough Canadian Poetrain Tour in April. I skipped Scarborough Arts. He was one of the organizers of the Great Canadian Poetrain Tour in April 15. His poetry has appeared in many, many journals, including my own, Harbinger Asylum, as well as Lumax anthologies, and we won't go into the list. You can look at the flyer. And he's also worked with 100,000 Poets for Change, which was organized by Michael Rothenberg III. So without further ado, let's let Pat say anything he wants to say about himself, and we'll get straight into the interview.
Thank you very much, Dustin. Thank you very much, Mutiu. I'm really honored to be here and to be a part of this. Been really impressed with the body of work that you folks have been putting out already, and just how ambitious it is. And to be asked to participate in this and to be able to share my poetry with you and with your audience is a tremendous honor.
Well, thank you, and we're glad to have you. So, your book that just came out, which I have a copy of, I'm grateful for. It's called The Other Life, and in the introduction, Terry Barker writes, there is a persistent, indeed plodding expression of the unsatisfactoriness of our common temporal life, held together with hope for its improvement and faith in the reality of a truth that is transcendent. So tell us what inspires those sentiments from your poetry. I know you have a Roman Catholic background and have been immersed in a lot of the socialist literature and so forth. So tell us about that. What was that journey like?
Yes, thank you. It's definitely been quite a trip. It goes all the way back to my high school days, going to an all-boys Catholic high school and doing Ban the Bomb marches on the street corner on Friday morning with my fellow students and with the teachers. Mm-hmm. And it's just something that progressed and just grew over the years, even years that I wasn't going to church, but I still had a spiritual life, still read the Bible. And then I started going back to the church again, and not just the Catholic church, but really any Christian church I'm very comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And certainly, like a lot of Canadians have a certain socialist leaning, but mm-hmm. I try to let my faith be an embodiment of my politics, and my politics to be an embodiment of my faith.
So there's an intersection of faith and progressive politics. So what writers have brought you in that direction, and who has furthered your intellect on those matters?
Absolutely. In terms of Canadian writers, Milton Acorn has been huge. Raymond mm-hmm. Souster, and I mean, Raymond Souster was a banker, so I mean, mm-hmm. he wasn't like a die-cast socialist or anything like that, but mm-hmm. he certainly had a concern for everyday people and for the common good. And he wrote poetry in such a way that it was easy to understand and easy to appreciate for everybody, not just for the PhD crowd. And in terms of a poet that your American audience will recognize, the late great Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who just passed away. Very important poet to me.
Right. So would you describe your use of language as sort of a democratic ethos?
I definitely I try to have a concise language and complex thought. I want mm-hmm. the words to be understandable, but I want it to convey something that has a deep meaning and will be something that you have to ruminate upon. But it is understandable. I try to make it as understandable as possible.
Right. So you're kind of called the people's poet in Canada. Like that's one of your titles, and I think that speaks for the volume itself. And coming
Thank you.
to yeah, it's
My
quite a
poet
volume.
Chris Sayers has said that I am the next poet in the canon of people's poetry in Canada that was started by people like Al Purdy and Milt Acorn and Raymond Souster. And that's a tremendous honor. And,
Right, I bet it is. It's good to have your fellow compatriots say, "Hey, you're doing a great job." Keep the fire running. So another question I had, and it kind of goes back to some of the original thoughts we were discussing at the beginning. Is okay. So the book title is The Other Life. Now, what is the other life?
The Other Life is a line from my poem Madness, which is about my call center job, of my day job. Don't get me wrong, I don't regret having a day job and contributing to society or whatever, but sometimes it eats my brain, and sometimes it feels like I'm not really being myself between 9 and 5. The other life is the life between 5 and 9, where I can do volunteer work, where I can go to poetry readings, where I can be in community with other people and really just be free to express myself as the person that I am.
So one of my thoughts in the title is the other life is it represents a transcendent truth, as the quote from Barker says, and it also can represent a temporal life of self-actualized human being in the world, expressing his individuality or her individuality or their individuality. And so here's kind of an interesting political and thought-provoking question. How do we protect the uniqueness of the individual within the capitalist model of
It's a great question, Dustin, and it's one that's always been a problem in capitalism. There was a time when I feel that capitalism did, and this is going to really upset my socialist friends, did support the greatest good for the greatest number of the population. But there just became a time about 35, 40 years ago where there wasn't that same kind of support of public programs, education, healthcare, and it got worse in the 90s here in Canada. And the struggle to be oneself is fundamental to being an artist, to being a true Christian, and it's not something that's really encouraged in modern society, in postmodern society.
I agree. It's the act of defiance, kind of giving the finger and saying, hey, back off. I'm my own person. It's very tough. It takes a lot of guts, and it's very nice to do it in poetic form, because then you can be pretty about it or interesting, and people can choose to look at it, and if they don't like it, then they can put it down, or if they can want to think about it, and another question back to the beginnings again. So you have this intersection of the Christian faith with progressive politics that from what I've read of the introduction came from Vatican II, and you said you had beginnings there in the Catholic community, and so how did those teachings affect you, and when did you first become introduced to them?
Well, I grew up in the Catholic Church. I mean, going to the Catholic Church since literally I was born. It was a very fundamental part of my family's experience. The Catholic Church, Vatican II, came in 1956, and that's when it sort of started to become a bit more progressive. And I'm very impressed with some of the things that Pope Francis has said recently. But disappointed last week when he kind of went back on some of the things he was saying about gay marriage. I'm straight, but I'm a proud ally, and I was a little disappointed last week after he had been saying things recognizing same-sex unions and that these people are still part of God's divine plan and everything else. For the Vatican to go 180 degrees on that last week was a little disappointing.
Yeah, I think so too. And it seems like they do that quite a bit. They kind of flip flop and move from going forward and leaving behind the traditions, and then they suddenly come back like they did with Galileo. Under I think it was under Pope Benedict when he was in, and they were just like, hey, we've pardoned you. Never mind, forget it. So,
Consistency is the biggest challenge for human beings, because
yes,
I mean, I am
and
very, very, very far away from being a perfect person, and I
right,
make mistakes all the time. I contain multitudes, like Whitman said, who's
uh-huh,
another transcendentalist
mhm,
poet. Ralph Waldo
right,
Emerson is another transcendentalist poet, and you have to check yourself. It's a day by day
hmm,
thing, and it's a big challenge, and it's an even bigger challenge when you're trying to do it in an artistic form that's going to have posterity.
right,
You know, if I
hmm,
misbehave and I do something inconsistent with my behavior, with my philosophy, people aren't necessarily going to remember that thing. But when it's something that's in print, it's in one of my books, or if it's in your journal, or one of the other places I get published, it's there for posterity.
right. It's fixed in time. So I think that one of the things we can bring from this, so forth from this conversation, is about being consistent and self-honest. And if you would like, I have a poem that I think reflects that from your work, called "When My Worlds Collide." If you don't
Oh,
mind reading
wonderful.
that,
Thank
I
you.
love that
You
poem. I
actually
really
chose
enjoy it.
poems. Great, because yeah, I sent you and Mutiu a few poems. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
no, I'm excited to share this poem with you. I have a dear friend called Charles Smith, who
Uh-huh.
runs a wonderful multi-arts collective called the Wind in the Leaves Collective. And they do all sorts of great things. There's dance, there's music, there's poetry, they're framing cultural exchange, even on the political level, and you know, the governmental level in Ontario and the wider. And the first time I went to see them, I wrote this poem. And Kevin Ormsby, who is the prime dancer in the Win in the Leaves Collective, said, "You're going to be so inspired. You're going to just go home and you're going to write a poem tonight." I'm like, "I'm very tired. I'm probably not going to do it tonight." But I actually wrote the first draft of this poem at about 2 o'clock in the morning on the Sunday. And this is When My Worlds Collide. My world was always meant to come together, to have flow, unity, and coherence. Even as a little boy, I lived in many worlds. Problems always would arise when they would collide, especially when I forced them to. Now I live in that flow, embrace my reality, the uniqueness of who I am. I accept the differences of all the worlds in which I walk. I love each one of them individually, as well as part of a collective blessing. Now, when my worlds collide, there is no confusion, no fear, no resentment, and I am free to be myself, not the guy I am within any crowd. Now I can try to help make the world the kind of place I have always wanted to live in, now that my life has begun.
Wow, I think that
Wow, impressive.
summarizes the yeah, I think that summarizes the whole principle of self-actualization, living against the grain, but respecting other people to also live their truth in their life. And
Let's talk about your
wonderful poem.
beyond your poetry. You've been involved in different literary activities in the past, and up to today, you are still actively involved. Tell us about some of your literary activities that you're involved in, especially 100,000 Poet for Change.
Absolutely, absolutely, Moody. 100,000 Poets for Change, the great worldwide phenomenon started by Michael Rothenberg back in 2011. Uh, I participated the first day of it as a reader. I didn't even know much about it at the time, but a group that I became involved with called the International Festival of Poetry of Resistance held an event, and I got to read a few poems at it. I was not very well known at the time, and I don't think people knew what to expect when I got up on the stage. But, anyways, by the following year, I actually hosted two events, big events that had like 30 or 40 poets each
Mm,
for 100,000 Poets for Change, and that just wound up going on and being a normal progression. Unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, I didn't host any events last year. I don't have the professional Zoom like you guys do, so I can't really accommodate like 10 readers, much less 40. And I've
mhm.
really missed doing it last year, but I promised Michael that I would try and get back in the saddle again this year and be a part of it going forward. And I mean, I've connected him to other people. I've connected him to people in Iowa. I've connected him to people in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. 100,000 Poets is one of my causes, and it means a lot to me, and I want to see it grow, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
So apart from
How do
Poet for Change, what other literary activism are you involved in Canada?
So as Dustin mentioned, I was part of the Great Canadian Poetry Tour in 2015. So I missed the Austin Poetry Festival in 2015 because we went across the country, giving readings on the Via train, which is the national train system. It's like our Amtrak here in Canada. And then we get off and give readings in Winnipeg and in Edmonton and Vancouver, and of course here in Toronto. And wow, it was a mind-blowing experience. Not something I'd ever want to do again. I was more tired at the end of that vacation than I was at the beginning of it. But what a great experience. And I got to meet a lot of people. And I've always kind of been an organizer. I've always been kind of a planner. And it was just a natural progression. And I firmly believe that if you want people to give you great opportunities like you are giving me here today, and like Dustin has worked with my poetry, you got to be willing to work with somebody else too. You got to be willing to do things for other people as well.
Right. Collaboration is one of the reasons I got involved in poetry, because it's not so much, you don't see the money flowing in so much, but you see interesting people, you meet great people, you have a great time, you get these events, you may get to travel a little bit, you may learn new skills that you didn't know, hear stories that you would have never heard before. So that's definitely something I find unique about poetry and as a community, is that it's not really about earning your keep. You just can't do it as much as people sometimes think you can. But if you want, I have another poem I'd like you to read.
Oh, wonderful!
It's the Order, the Rudyard Kipling. Yeah, so
okay,
that's a very interesting one.
Absolutely, yes. So your listeners will definitely, your people watching your wonderful program will definitely be familiar with the great poem "If" by Rudyard Kipling. So if you know that poem and you know anything about the great Canadian people's poet Milton Acorn, just imagine this to be sort of the socialist amalgam of those two things. Milton Acorn very, very much a socialist himself, but Order, with a shout out or two to Rudyard Kipling. I'm not here to change the world order, nor interested in revolution, just evolution, where we all grow and work together to help bring order to the world. If anyone doesn't have enough to eat, anywhere in a world full of plenty, if anyone cannot be all they desire to be, to grow and become the divine design, if anyone does not have access to healthcare, essential service is a basic human right. If anyone does not live in security, the dignity and respect of their humanness. Even I, as a white, Anglo, hetero, fully able, highly educated, first world Christian, cannot understand why we won't accept difference and embrace the beauty we all have in common. If you are time to believe, it's time for anyone who realizes these conditions to realize these conditions. From the ones you love the very most to the one you think your worst enemy. If you are ready to believe, it's time to change things for the better before they get worse. Then yours is the world and everything in it, my sisters and brothers. All the hopes and dreams and pains and sorrows and sufferings and joys. You are now part of it, especially if you weren't before.
Definitely those last handful of lines definitely have the echoes of "If" by Kipling, and for those who don't know, that poem also inspired Muhammad Ali. I visited Louisville. I visited the Muhammad Ali exhibit, and he was very inspired by that poem. He used to recite it and he had it memorized. So yeah,
Muhammad Ali is one of the people that introduced me to poetry.
Oh, really?
I always say, people ask me who introduced you to poetry.
Wow. Tell us about that, please.
My reading, it was Muhammad Ali. It was Neil Peart, the drummer and lyricist of Rush, and King David Psalms.
What were you saying? Sorry, I think we cut Mutiu off a little bit.
Sorry, Mutiu, what are you saying?
I said, how did he inspire you to become a poet?
Well,
Muhammad Ali.
Muhammad Ali, he just had such a great presence. It just seemed like, hey, poetry must be cool if the heavyweight champion of the world is out there spitting poetry after winning boxing matches and, you know, being very cool about it. And then there was Neil Peart, the drummer and lyricist of Rush. And ever since very small boy, right around the same time as Muhammad Ali made me interested in poetry, there was my introduction to the band Rush, who are my all-time favorite band. And then back to the Catholic thing or the Christian thing, King David's Psalms. So people say, what got you interested in poetry? Those are the three people that got me interested in poetry.
Quite an eclectic mix there. You've got a drummer and a lyricist and a boxer and a psalmist, a saint and a, you know, one of God's people. You know, it's very eclectic mix there. So I mean, back to the Catholic.
We're all God's people. It's really hard to be a saint. That's for sure.
There you go. That's one of God's people, not the only one of God's people. But there's quite a few of us, I guess you could say. It's like everybody. You definitely the big human family. That's part of the entire humanistic tradition. So, you know, going back to self-actualization and it's kind of a strange question, but how do you feel about poets that are more conservative, you know, that have a more conservative bent? There's a lot of them in Texas, I know that. Or a lot of
absolutely. You know what? I have lots of friends that are very conservative and have politics that are very much the opposite of mine. I'm talking very dear friends, guys I've been friends with since like the early 1970s. And they understand and respect what I'm about, and I understand and respect what they are about. I don't think that being a fiscal conservative necessarily means that you are a bad person and you don't care about the human race and you don't care about people who aren't doing as well as yourself. I think that there is no one right answer on this planet to all the world's problems. I know I have to follow my my path to my destiny, but I respect the right of other people to follow their paths to their destiny, especially as long as it doesn't, you know, involve outright hatred and victimization of other people.
Exactly. That's really a strong point.
So many great friends in Texas, and you know, like you say, I mean, most of them are very conservative. I'm not going to name names right now. They're very proud of the fact that they're very conservative, and they're like, you're Canadian, and we can hear it in your poetry and whatever. You're a liberal. And you know what it means when they call you a liberal in Texas, but I'm like, yeah, sure, that's true, yes, I am. And but you know, nothing but respect, and made great friends while I was in Texas, and can't wait to go again. Hopefully in 2022 I can go again.
I hope so. Maybe meet at AIPF again. So and this is a question about the way you construct language. Do you have any ideas how you're able to take such, you know, basic, you know, you have so many very complicated sometimes ideas in your work, and how do you take that using the kind of minimalism or the basic root formula that you use? Do you have any idea how you can translate that into complex ideas?
It took a long time and a lot of practice, and it's a lot harder than it looks. The biggest trick is to avoid cliche. And to avoid hackneyed language of any type, and to not be overly simplistic or pandering, but to be true to myself. And it's a challenge, and you know, there's no such thing as a one draft poem. I mean, you know, I might get a poem almost perfect on the first draft, but I don't send it out for weeks until I've read it and made alterations and that sort of thing.
So is there like an incubation process with the poetry? Do you write it and let it sit for a while? Yeah, I think that's very true of most poets, is they don't just spit it out and be like, okay, there it is out in the world. You know, you have to let it, you know, come to fruition, and you know, we'll go back and look at it maybe a few weeks later. That's what I do generally, and I look at my poetry and I say, you know, hey, this needs improvement here. I don't know what I'm saying here, but it's a good idea. It needs elaboration. et cetera, et cetera. It's a tricky, as you said, it's a long process.
It
And
is. It is. Clarity is the big thing that I shoot for. And like Ferlinghetti said, of course, writing is difficult because it's thinking, and thinking is difficult. And having straight thoughts that even
right,
you can follow, let alone anybody else can follow, is really challenging.
absolutely.
What do you have to say about this quotation? Simplicity is not inferiority, and
Yeah.
complexity isn't superiority in writing, especially in poetry. What's your view about this statement?
I completely agree with you there. I think that simplicity is the thing that should be the big goal of poetry. I mean, I respect academic poets, and I know lots of people that are very formalist poets, and I do write the odd formalist poem. But for the most part, I strive for simplicity. I want it to be understandable. I want people in the street who aren't as well read as I am to know what I'm saying and to say, hey, I dig what you're saying and I appreciate it. I feel like you're speaking to me. I feel like you're engaging me in a conversation. That's
Mhm.
what it is. It is a dialogue. Poetry, more than any other written form, is a dialogue with the reader.
Right.
And you have to encourage the reader to want to be in that dialogue with you and to want to continue to read it, or they're going to tune you out.
And other poets can also respond through poetry to a poem. That happens so often that we build on each other's bricks, as they say, on the shoulders of giants, as the phrase goes. So do you have any particular, globally speaking, any, quote unquote dead poets that you really admire?
Well, the big ones are certainly Yeats
Mhm.
and Seamus Heaney from Ireland are,
Okay.
are as an Irish descendant, big for me.
Mhm.
The transcendentalist poets, as we mentioned, Emerson, S.T. Coleridge
Mhm.
is very big for me. But you know what? I just like to read a lot of poetry and read a lot of different voices and try
Right.
to get something out of everybody that I read. Like, for instance, your book, Harbinger Asylum. Every time I pick it up, I encounter somebody that I've never met before, but I always see something in it that I can appreciate. And that's
Mhm.
my involvement in the poetry dialogue. And it's a great joy. It's a great pleasure.
It is absolutely. Do you find right now, are you reading anything that you find provoking in thought, or in general, what you're, when you're reading it, you want to interact with it? Is there any books you're reading right now that you find it intriguing?
I am reading the first book by Danny Peart, who's Neil Peart's brother.
Okay.
Ruined by Love. This is this first collection that came out 10 years ago, and there's lots of things about him and Neil. So as a
Mm,
result, automatically right there, that resonates with me because Neil is somebody I always admired and looked
absolutely.
up to for like 40 plus years now. And there's also beautiful poems about love and about his wife and that sort of thing in there. And just, wow, it's just incredible. To me, poetry is like scripture. I mean, I want to sit
Hmm.
there and read about 3 pages of it, and then I want to think about it for a while before I move on to any further
Right.
poetry.
Right.
To Otherwise, it's just like reading prose. You're just trying to plow through 20 pages of it or
Would you like
whatever.
to read one of those poems from his book, or
Oh,
if you want to
wow.
do that? Yeah, feel
Okay,
free.
yeah,
Go
that would be
for it.
awesome.
Go
That
for it. I
would be awesome. Let me
think we have
find one
time.
that really resonates.
So if you're liking this program, please subscribe to YouTube. We're talking about poetry with Pat Connors of Canada. He's the people's poet coming up.
Okay, which one? This one or this one? I should have planned for this part. I'm sorry.
I kind of threw it at you. I kind of surprised you a bit. I don't think you were expecting that. So, but yeah,
No, no, no.
whichever
I
one.
love to give a shout out to Danny Peart. Danny Danny saw a poem that I wrote about his brother on the League of Canadian Poets website, and then he reached out to me.
Oh,
Here we go.
That's really
And
nice.
then I sent him my book, and he sent me this book, and he gave some criticism on a poem that I sent him recently. That's not quite ready for prime time yet, but just this. And he wrote this beautiful poem, "One Life to Live," that's vibing off this famous quote by Mary Oliver. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Now, here's his poem. What if it was true that you only have one life to live, one mind to develop, one body to manage? Would you get fat, lazy, dine on junk? Would more activity be worth your time and effort? If you could be creative, playful, strong, and fast, would you go after it? There'll always be someone fitter than you, certainly smarter, funnier, faster. Why not give up, relax, play games, eat, drink, watch today's closed formations for cloud formations for a sign? This fitness thing, risk of injury, heat stroke, dehydration, possible embarrassment, specific footwear to buy, clothing, instruction, so much time involved. Take walking. Who hasn't tripped, been hit by unexpected rain? Could it possibly be worth the trouble? What if there's snow? One precious life to live. Make it wide, make it full, make it long.
That seems to be a theme of our conversation, is being yourself, being true to yourself. I'm looking at a quote here from A New Approach. If I am to become the man I am to become, I have to stop being the one others would have me be. And it's kind of a
That's
joke.
funny, because that poem actually came to me in like the late 90s, when I wasn't actually writing a whole lot of poetry in those days, but it just kind of like the humorous aspect of it sort of came to me one evening. And then finally, about the mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006, something like that, I actually put it down to paper. And then after a few tries, I got it right. And I was just an open micer in those days. I wasn't featuring or organizing poetry events or anything like that. I would just read that on the open mic, and it always got a laugh, especially because of that last line.
There's a joke that circulates about stop trying to impress people because you don't even like them anyway. The people that you don't like, you don't want to impress them anyway. Why do you waste your time?
Well, it's also about myself and taking myself too seriously. And I take myself way too seriously. And I have to put in something funny in my poetry every now and again to remind myself that it's fun. It's not supposed to be, just everything is a manifesto or whatever. I mean, yes, certainly I'm bleeding on the page. I'm saying who I am. This is what Pat Connors is all about. But it's also fun. It's supposed to be entertaining, and I have to stop taking myself so bloody seriously all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Generally speaking, how has poetry changed your life?
Poetry has taken me from being a very competitive person, and I'm still completely obsessed with sports, but I can't play anymore. And from being a very competitive person to being a more of a process-oriented person, to become the best that I am, and to enjoy all the steps of the journey instead of just trying to be,
kind of teaching you to relax and live and flow with things. I think and I think there's a good Nietzsche quote about learning to laugh at oneself, and I think Emerson would probably agree with that sentiment.
For
absolutely
sure.
You don't want to be too serious. It's just not becoming. And you would make yourself miserable probably. So do you have anything final to say? We've got about a couple of minutes left. If you have any advice, any words of wisdom you want to share. I think we lost him.
He's still there. If you are joining us for the first time, this is Parrot Literary Corner, where when between you have Dustin Pickering, and on the show today we have Part Corners from Canada. So could you, I think it's back here now, so can get us a final message to our listeners?
I'm here. Sorry, wrestling with my Wi-Fi a bit.
Your message.
Gotcha. If you want to have a couple
What was
words
your question,
left,
Dustin? Sorry.
do you have any final words or for future poets, artists, people listening in? What should they be doing right now? What words would you like to impart?
Thank you. The thing that you really need to do is you need to develop your own unique voice, your ability to say the words in the way that only you can say. You don't want to say it the way that Ferlinghetti says it or the way Emerson says it. I mean, we're all going to be inspired by these great artists. And, you know, certainly I've been known to pinch a line or two from Frost or whoever now and again, but obviously with referencing it. But the important thing is for you to have your own strong, unique voice, for you to put your own imprint, your own stamp on the world. And that's what you need to do with your poetry. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of work. And you need to find somebody who can help you to look at it objectively and at your work objectively so that you can have that distance from it and then see what you need to do to make it even better, to make it even stronger. Because everybody's a poet. Everybody has that ability in them.
That's excellent words of wisdom. And today's message is self-honesty, hard work will get you far in poetry. That's where you want to be. That's where you need to be. Yeah, jump on the train and jump on and ride as Pat has done. We have Pat Connors here. And please subscribe to our channel. We have so much to offer you as myself, Dustin Pickering, Mutiu Olawuyi. We both would like to express our appreciation, and please do subscribe to the channel and let everyone else poets. We're looking for people to interview. So just get in touch with me on Facebook, Dustin Pickering, or Mutiu. We can get in touch with him. The New York Parrot Literary Corner. This has been a fine afternoon of poetry with Pat Connors, and we would like to bid you adieu. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.